So I'd love to first ask you, Alistair, you've seen both these guys give their presentations. You've talked to a lot of different companies. What's the kind of unexpected barrier to success in this space? Like, what's the human thing that kind of comes up that tends to stop organizations from making the shift into kind of thinking about how they use data differently and really institutionalizing innovation?
Yeah, I think one of the things, I was talking to Janet Eggers, who was at Blackbaud and Spreadshirt, and she's done a lot of startups. She had this great example of a company, when she worked at Spreadshirt, that was doing the net promoter scores, when you survey people and say, how many of you would tell your friends if this was a good thing or would not tell your friends about our service? And they tracked net promoter score daily, and they got the reports weekly by country. And they noticed that, I think it was Norway, all of a sudden the net promoter scores for Norway went down. So nobody in Norway liked Spreadshirt anymore. Most organizations would look at that and go, oh, it turns out the Norwegians don't like t-shirts. And they'd move on, right? It's a score. And she described this as being data obsessed, not data driven. So in their case, they called up the Norwegian post office and said, what's going on? And the post office said, oh, we centralized customs last week. It used to be done in regional post offices. Now it's in one area. So sure enough, this showed them there was a problem with how many packages are getting cleared and delays. And then they investigated, they found out how to improve their labeling and solve the problem. So I think a lot of organizations will do the right thing. They'll get their net promoter score, whatever, but they won't have that sort of tenacity to dig in. It's sort of more than their job's worth to go and find out where that problem is. And that's when it becomes a human problem. That's when you need the relentlessly engaged people. Because once you find that, everyone goes, oh, that's an epiphany. It's a great example. And you need to take those examples and kind of showcase them and say, it's not enough to stop once you got the data. You got to go find the cause behind it. Yeah, that's a big challenge.
And David, that seems to me a little bit your approach. I mean, there's a huge investment in people that it seems to be you're making and kind of enabling them to be skilled to spot these problems, raise them, flag them, and try to identify savings and things like that. What's for you is kind of like the big, like having seen Alistair's presentation, talking to lots of other cities, what's the kind of number one thing that's kind of that enables the city to make that leap and start investing in people, and what should they be investing? What's the number one thing?
Yeah, we think about it foundationally, clearly, and it's about investing in the folks who do the work. What I see a lot of other cities, or at least I saw Denver doing for a while, is investing only in its management and supervisor level folks. So this is really about training the folks at the very foundational levels to innovate and defining what that innovation is. A big part of it for us is teaching them to think like a kid. If you ask a kid and an adult to draw a turtle, the kid will draw the turtle 600 times and won't think anything of it. We'll just keep drawing and say, which turtle do you like the best? And an adult, a lot of times, will just sit there and get really flustered. And so it's about trying to break down those barriers. What we found is that you have to go whole hog. You have to invest. We've trained over 1,500 folks out of our 10,000 person workforce so far in this. You have to build that momentum so you get the Heather O'Hares out there who are able to pull everybody else along and build that sort of contagious spirit.
Yeah, and what I love too is I feel like often in kind of these contexts, the conversation's often about like, we're gonna build this really amazing tool and we're gonna deploy it into the city. But if you don't empower people to use the tool, to feel like they can to actually know how to use it, but then even if they discover something to make use of that discovery, the tool really doesn't do anything. And that feels a little bit like what you have been doing, in San Francisco, is you guys have a powerful tool and you're able to use it. How did that come about? What was the secret that made you guys not just have the tool, but then empower your employees to make it work?
Well, I think it's been interesting because our tool is very outwardly facing, so we're working a lot with this external community beyond city government employees. And something that we've discovered is that it's not only city government employees that feel a little bit stifled when they're asked to innovate, but it's also the rest of the outside community. I think that's why there's so many views to a challenge, but not so many submissions. I think the turtle example you gave is great. People get a little bit stifled when they think they're on the spot, but internally, this thing with the data, one of the challenges, I think, to institutionally innovating by using data or with data or these analytics is that numbers are really scary. I mean, when we look at these challenges that we've actually invested quite a lot into, and we see that there were only 19 submissions or 12 views, it's appalling. I mean, it's really scary to have those conversations with yourself and internally with our team. Should we keep investing in this? Is it worth it? And do we need to change our metric of success? So numbers are daunting for city government because it does hold you accountable in a different way, and it does cause you to have to shift your behavior, but then shifting that behavior, if you work in city government, I think a lot of people know there's not much time to really reflect because you're usually reacting.
I think it's a really good point that, especially in any industry or any field that's so poll-driven and sort of data-driven, there's data that is the conclusion and there's data that's part of an ongoing experiment. And you got to recognize that 19 submissions as gee, that project wasn't a success is bad. 19 submissions is one of 50 different civic engagement things from which we learn what does and doesn't work. You know, you guys talk about the project you did with good, and the learning from that is this is a great way to reach people. We need to find a better way to turn those views into submissions. How do we experiment with that? Great. Then I learned something. And everybody I talk to who says we don't frame these as products. We frame them as studies that might accidentally create a product or service. But that's like a side effect. Because then you say to your boss, I'm here to learn what the best way to engage citizens is. How many people do we get? Well, that doesn't matter. We learned a lot more about how to engage citizens. Now, it turns out it was really successful and we've got this amazing new project, but that's really not the point. The point is we've learned how to engage our citizens better. And when you reframe the discussion to this is a learning project, it's just the best way to learn is to try and do stuff, it changes the whole mindset from did you do stuff to did you learn something.
That's right, because I think a lot of these insights could lead to other citizen engagement projects that the city has. When we have public meetings,
Right.
What are some of the learnings from this that could be used to make those meetings more
How do you
effective?
increase attendance at a public hearing?
Right.
Oh, look, we've learned some stuff from this. And so you have to realize that it's the ability of an organization to learn quickly and iteratively that you're really working on, and then useful outputs as almost a side effect of getting better at that.
But it definitely is scary when you get into a world where the numbers are more real. The newspaper has gone through this. Like, I remember talking to a journalist or a columnist to be like, I have 200,000 readers, and you're like, no, you have 200,000 editions of your newspaper that go out, and he really believed that. And now he lives in a world where actually he sees how many people click on his article, and that's got to be enormously deflating in a certain way. And so, how do you kind of bring the culture along to accept hey, it's actually not a bad outcome, but it's not what you thought. And I feel cities get there a little bit sometimes. Like we put an ad on the radio, or put an ad in the newspaper, and we've reached our citizens, and we're done. And now we actually see a lot more.
Oh yeah, I used to think I was healthy until I stepped on a scale. Doesn't mean I'm healthy by not stepping on the scale, right?
So I kind of want to put you guys all on the spot, because you've each now seen one another's presentations. I'd love for you to share, if you had a question for one of the presenters, or if there's something you saw that you loved, I'd love to hear kind of what it is that you saw that you loved. So any comments on one another's presentations? Because you guys are kind of all doing interesting things. Maybe, Dave, put you really on the spot there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the ability to think through how to use the analytics in a non-frightening way is really important. We've spent a lot of time focused on strategic plans and getting folks from a place where they were just scared out of their mind to do this stuff to a place where when we said, hey, we're abandoning the city stat model and moving to a new phase, they were really disappointed. They'd gotten to a place of comfort on that. So I think that is a kind of a neat learning to take away of how this stuff should continue to evolve, and you can't get stuck in any one place.
Yeah, I was in an airport the other day, and the waitress brought me my bill, and it was signed with purple ink, thanks, little heart over the letters, whatever. And I thought to myself, because I'm an analytics dork, did I tip more because it was purple? Maybe I would have tipped more if it was green. And then I thought, well, how would this organization tell? Maybe there's a 1% correlation between ink color and tip, which would amount to thousands and thousands of dollars more per person over a year, right? But I don't know. And so the question was, how would I institutionalize the ability to run that experiment? It's an interesting thought experiment. Something as stupid as, does the pen color you sign on the receipt on influence your tipping amount, is something that a restaurant should probably experiment with. It may have an impact on their business. So just ask yourself, for something stupid like that, how would you empower the people in Denver to say, I have an experiment I want to run. Do I have a system I can use to set up that experiment? Right? Because I don't think people know, they have an idea, but they don't know how to test it, they don't know what a control group is. And so how do we set up systems to let the average person run an experiment? That's a real problem.
That's, I think,
Go ahead.
to me, that's the question, that's the heart of it, is when you talk about testing assumptions and having a hypothesis, we're talking about science.
Right.
And in government, we don't do science. That's
Right.
not what we're there for. We do policy making, and it's not always scientific. So exactly how could you use some of the management training that you're working on to build that into some of the management protocol?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do. I mean, we do obviously through Lean a lot of things related to Kaizen and rapid improvement events, and trying to get folks into that iterative process as quickly and as often as possible. But it's still a challenge. I mean, there's just this natural pull to come back to the old way of doing business and just get back to work, and almost a desire to settle into the status quo that you just have to continuously fight.
But there's also
go ahead.
there's also documenting this, right? Whenever there's experiments, you need to
Right.
document them so that you can learn from them. There's the data that they produce, but then also the experience, the qualitative part of that. And I'm wondering how that gets integrated into the learnings as well.
And the hardest part is having a hypothesis. I think purple ink makes me tip more.
Right.
I think using good increases views. And people don't like to state the hypothesis because then you're wrong. But without stating a hypothesis, you have this kind of revisionist history.
Right.
I have a slightly unrelated question. So you showed some great data on the sort of funnel of engagements and ideas and comments and so on. But that's a lot of data for someone who doesn't live in it to consume. How do you guys, what have you done that helps the average person consume complex data like that? Have you had to work on like visualizations or simplifying it or infographics? What are you doing to communicate this data better?
Yeah, not for this project yet, but we have held hackathons and design charrettes to make these types of infographics. But we're still figuring out what to do with this data, really how to use it effectively. I mean, I think that that's the challenge of any organization is how do you actually use data effectively? And not just the data, but the analytics. Like, how do you synthesize this? And that's what we're still figuring out.
Yeah, I mean, that does seem to be a real challenge. There's a lot of really good data hidden, locked away. But even if you make the raw data available, unless you give people tools to analyze and explore that data, like the Gapminder stuff that Google did, that's unless they have tools for exploring it, the raw data on its own, that's not that interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we found, if you can create a safe environment for folks to play around with that and try to get to performance metrics versus just throwing a whole bunch of data up on the wall and calling it good and saying, yeah, we're data driven, that if you can let them go through that evolution in a safe environment, that can get them to places where they go from strategic plans that have 75 numbers in them, but none of them are performance metrics to, maybe 10, and they're all hierarchically related to an overall mission that matters and has an outcome attached to it.
I think subversiveness is a big part of this as well. There's a great case study for the Houston airport where they had a real problem with the conveyor belts there because it was taking passengers 9 minutes to get their bags, and the top complaint in surveys about passenger satisfaction was, my luggage takes too long. So they did this massive year-long overhaul of their conveyor belt system, and they got it down from like 9 minutes to 6 minutes. And then they did a survey afterwards to find out passengers' biggest complaints, and guess what? It was, my bags take too long. And then some enterprising civil servant said, you know what, I'm going to try parking the planes further for a month. And complaints went to zero. Because it turns out that what they were complaining about was sitting around waiting for their bags, not how long the bags took, right? And the cost of parking the planes further, in addition to giving people some exercise, the cost of parking the planes further was nominal, right? So if you're that government and you look at that and you're like, I could retool my entire conveyor belt for millions of dollars or park the planes further, it takes a certain subversive kind of hacker mentality to say, I'm lazy, what's the easy answer? Right? And try that first instead of just going, hey, we should rebuild the conveyor belt system. I think there's a real sort of object lesson in that about you have to have this subversive mindset. And it comes back to what you were saying about the kid. The kid doesn't just draw 600 turtles. They draw 600 turtles. Some of them are monsters that breathe fire because they're really experimenting, right? And it's that kind of out-of-the-box thinking that's part of the experimentation process.
So far, Alistair has told us that we should be parking planes further away so we walk more, and that he can't understand when someone's hitting on him. So, sorry.
I'm dating it, right?
So here's where I'd like us to turn, because we're beginning to get low on time.
Wait, the purple ink?
Yeah, so there might have been more going on there, man. I'm just letting you know. Some waitress is very unhappy right now.
That's right.
She's like, what did I do wrong? It's like purple ink. He's analyzing it. You guys have, you've all painted, I think, really interesting pictures of where your organizations are and some of the cool things you've done. Maybe really quickly, I'd love to hear a little bit of what's next. Like in your dream world, like what's the next year, the next 2 years look like? Where does your organization get to? What are you doing, and what's different about that?
So on that first tier that I outlined of the pyramid, where we are right now, which is a really cool place for us, is when we have a problem, we draw from our own people, and we will not bring in outsiders to help us fix those types of internal problems. So recently we had a really big challenge related to retail marijuana, and we just brought in black belts from around the city. That's our term, Denver Black Belts. It's probably poorly chosen, to help that team form a solution to that problem, and that built the confidence in the internal team that they could do it themselves and didn't have to rely. In other words, that innovation was something they were capable of. So I'd like to see that continue, and at the same time, we have to now move to that layer of citizen engagement that we've basically been putting on the back shelf.
I think for us, for Jay and I, it's a few things. The first is, as with probably a lot of the innovation officers in the audience, we've suffered this. You walk into a room and people either roll their eyes or ask you to fix their printer. So about a year and a half into it, we've gotten less of that. But less of that and more of people coming to us because they know that we can absorb some risk with them. So I would like that to increase. I think the second thing is taking some of your lessons learned in the work that you've done and really looking at how it's not just Jay and I who innovate. It's actually many people in the city, and we informally have this network of these people doing amazing work in some of the departments, but maybe formalizing that a little bit more. And then the third thing, relative to data, we're bringing on a chief data officer who will have a pretty large mandate, but one of the areas that I hope he goes into, or he or she goes into, is with predictive analytics and really looking at how to build some interesting models that can not only reflect what has happened, but what could happen, to start building and helping to shape some hypotheses that could be tested.
That's great. So I want to thank all of our panelists. If everybody get a huge round of applause. Thank you so much, guys.